Well, welcome back to the Anti-War Room. I'm Tom Andrews, and we are going to have one heck of a discussion today because it has been one heck of a week in Washington, D.C., both in the House and the Senate. Major debates, major votes, major developments with lots of implications for the anti-war movement and the country coming up in the next few days. And to help us sort all this through, we have John Issacs from the Council for the Livable World on my right. And on my left, we have, as you know, Darcy Scott-Martin, who is with True Majority, and together we're going to try to sort this out. First of all, John, let's start with the Senate. There was an important vote yesterday on a proposal by the Democrats. It was sponsored by the Majority Leader, Harry Reid. What was Harry Reid and the Democrats calling for, and what happened?
The legislation before the Senate yesterday would have mandated the beginning of a troop withdrawal 4 months after the bill finally passes, and that is mandatory. And then there was a goal of completing the withdrawal by early next year. That was a vote yesterday. It lost. The Reid resolution lost 48 to 50. So in some ways that was the defeat. On the other hand, we've made significant progress, and the kind of progress we need to continue making this year. Last year, there was a non-binding amendment put forward by Democrats that got 39 votes. This time it was actually a binding resolution. Didn't go as far as we want, not as far as the House language, not as far as getting out by the end of the year, but nonetheless it moves a lot further down the road. Significantly, almost all Democrats in the Senate, except for two Democrats and one independent, voted for it. The Reid resolution yesterday. One Republican broke ranks and voted for it. Ultimately, to win, to get the troops out of Iraq, we're going to have to get a lot more Republicans voting against the war to build pressure on President Bush. Didn't happen yesterday, but those Republicans who stick with a failed war policy are going to pay a price politically if they don't eventually switch.
Now, were you surprised in that light that some of the Republicans that are in very competitive districts that had otherwise indicated their criticism to the war, like Susan Collins of Maine, Norm Coleman in Minnesota, were you surprised that they went the other way?
Yeah, I think these Republicans are opening themselves up to real hypocrisy charges. They have some verbal complaints about the war, but when it comes to votes, they're supporting the president's war policy. They are up for election in a little over a year and a half, and again, I think they will pay a price. I'm a little bit surprised. On the other hand, they have 6 years of almost slavish devotion to the Bush policies, both domestic and foreign, and they're just in that habit right now.
And what happens now in the Senate? What can we expect on the horizon, as it were?
There will certainly be other votes this year when other bills come up. Perhaps as early as 2 weeks from now. The House, and we're about to talk about that, is starting to consider the Supplemental Appropriations Bill. That bill will go before the Senate Appropriations Committee next week, and then the full Senate the following week. There could again be some votes on Iraq. If not on that bill, there's a Defense Authorization Bill, Defense Appropriations Bill. There'll be many other opportunities to put senators on the record to build pressure on the Senate to get us out of the war as soon as possible.
Okay, so now the House. The House Appropriations Committee finally met, Darcy, yesterday, and voted out an appropriations package. What happened there?
Well, there had been a long-standing debate that had been going on. Progressive Democrats had been pushing to add some valuable restrictions on the war policy that they had hoped to offer as amendments and move further down the road. On the other end of the spectrum, there were some more conservative Democrats who belonged to a coalition called Blue Dogs, who had been working to strategically make it more palatable to a more conservative audience. One of the issues that they won on was removing a platform that talked about not bombing Iran without coming back to Congress to describe that. That was removed last week before the bill came to appropriations. The other issue that was fodder for that debate was adding waivers to the idea that Mr. Murtha wanted troops to be trained and ready. Blue Dogs said they wanted the president to be able to waive that provision if he needed to, although it has to be done publicly. That, in fact, also ended up in the final version coming out of appropriations. So yesterday...
So it was a weaker bill. So in other words, the proposal that actually came before appropriations, there were several compromises made before it even went out.
Right. Platform changes from what Mr. Murtha had originally
right. And Chairman Murtha was on, this very program with us, describing those benchmarks. Right. The radical idea, the troops have to be ready and equipped and rested before they go into combat. Too controversial for some of the
For his own party, evidently.
Of his own party, and so they said, okay, the president can waive those.
Can waive those.
Yeah. And Iran, and the other controversial, isn't it kind of extraordinary that it's controversial to say that before the president can attack a sovereign country, he has to come to the Congress and get explicit approval? That would be controversial. Interesting. But
one of the exciting things about that particular issue is that in the Senate there is standalone legislation on that, and a lot of talk of potentially putting it on their supplemental and giving us another bite at that apple, because there are some strong advocates for that model on the Senate side, and there's some hope for another chance on that.
Okay, so what's the good news about the appropriation?
I still had more bad news.
Oh, you did? Okay.
So
more bad news coming.
Mr. Murtha had also floated a number of other ideas earlier on the show, including talk of wanting to close down Guantanamo and making changes at Abu Ghraib. Those were never even put in any original version of the bill. They were kind of, eaten up before they even got that far.
And permanent basis? What happened to he was also said we should not have any more permanent bases.
Right, that didn't end up as...
No, I believe that's in the bill.
Okay.
I believe that is in the bill.
Right.
No permanent bases in Iran.
Okay.
And so what did happen is there were certain levels of amendments allowed on the appropriation while it was in the meeting. If you ever have seen any kind of a markup, it almost looks like a schoolroom, and everyone sits around their little desks and stands up and talks. Appropriations is a pretty big committee, and the room isn't really big enough for all the staff and members when they're doing a markup, so they sit in these kind of big hodgepodges, and folks whisper a lot and get yelled at.
So you're back to high school kind of thing?
Yes.
It's not pretty.
Yeah, no, it's not regal. So there were a number of amendments that were offered and discussed at length, although some of the ones that we would have liked to have seen happened to not get a chance. But when it came time to offer the Pelosi the Pelosi package, the things that have been put together that are now part of the bill, that vote was 37 to 27, and so it was a pretty close to party line vote, and it comes out strengthened by the fact that there were a number of folks who are very progressive on appropriations who voted for the Pelosi measure. It includes benchmarks which have some specific deadlines attached to both what the president has committed to saying will happen in Iraq, which could then leverage an earlier withdrawal if they are not met, and then specific deadlines further down the line even if all the things the president says he wants to see happen are happening there, which leads to potentially a fall of 08, final departure for our military forces that are designated as a certain kind of military force. There's also a pool of people that will be able to stay in regardless that have other designations and other activities in Iraq. That's a very controversial issue for people working on the war.
So basically, the president told us that, okay, if you support our escalation, here are all the good things that are going to happen. You're going to see political reform, there'll be a new constitution, there'll be a spare equitable distribution of oil, for example, there'll be local elections, all these wonderful things. And the Congress is saying, now, okay, but we're going to hold you accountable for these. And we're going to establish a time frame, and if you don't meet them, then the troops start coming home. But what you're saying is, even if you do meet them, then by October at the latest, or September of next year, 08, they will have completed the process of getting out. But let's talk about, just for a minute, this last thing you've just described, and that is this caveat. There's language in the bill that will allow some troops to remain, and including in that list would be trainers of Iraqi units. And the Iraq Study Group even went so far as to say that there should be as many as tens of thousands of troops embedded in Iraqi units during the Civil War. That is also included in this package. Is that right?
Right. And there's also the structures that we've already designated there. There's always this humorous notion of, what is a permanent base and what is not a permanent base. But we have the green zone built there. We have the airport, a very large structure, and we have the path in between, which will all need to be staffed and secured. I mean, that's the issue, is it ends up being a security designation. So it is the case that although the names will change on a certain number of these troops, it's not necessarily the case that they will depart. I also feel like, getting back to the Senate vote that happened yesterday, that in some way did undermine some of the strength that progressives in the House had to see that, the Senate is voting no. Then the onus is more heavily on the House to say we are going to say something about this. We're not going to let there be nothing said. So I think it did actually shift some people's perceptions and what they knew the media would be reporting about it, and changed where they thought they needed to go on that.
You mean it puts more pressure on the House to take action?
Right, or to say that we did something, even if it's not the something that everybody wants.
And Tom, if I can give a sort of a different take on this, it's important not to get lost in the details of the individual measures, whether the withdrawal is by June or July or 2007, 2008. We have a political struggle underway on how to end the war.
Right.
If you ask any of us, we'd say we want the war ended tomorrow, while troops brought out the next day. That's not on the table. The question is whether we can pressure the president to end the war, bring the troops home. Ultimately, we're going to need a two-thirds vote in the Congress, in both the House and Senate, to really ratchet up that pressure on the president. And that means we need to get a lot of Republicans supporting that. So if we get lost in the details, what specific date is, we're looking at the wrong way. We should be looking at the kind of pressure the House of Representatives is now putting on the president. If this measure that passes in the committee now passes on the House floor, it says to the country, it says to the president, it says to the media that the House of Representatives is saying, stop the war, set a timeline, get the troops out.
And that seems to be one of the most important features of this measure that was passed by the Appropriations Committee.
Absolutely.
For the first time, we have a piece of legislation that sets a date certain for the removal of combat troops from Iraq. That's never happened before, and that's in this bill. Now, there's lots of questions, and I should tell you, I don't know if I can say this, but I want to say this anyway, that in a Democratic caucus, the question of Iran was brought up. Why are we pulling Iran from the bill? And, of course, the answer is, well, because some of the Blue Dogs insisted upon it, but there was a commitment made in that caucus by Speaker Pelosi that there would be another opportunity to go ahead and deal with that question. And I would suppose that there are going to be other opportunities to deal with questions like these loopholes of, what is a training, how many trainers, how much time, all of those questions that are being raised. And as the leadership has said very clearly, look, this is a several-step process. There was lots of criticism when we voted, when the Congress voted on a non-binding resolution. Why are we voting non-binding when the hell is going on in Iraq? It's very binding. And we heard from the Democratic leadership, wait, that's just a step in the direction. Jack Murtha, the chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee of Defense, he was on here describing the next step, which is this step. And now the Speaker is saying, hey, keep your powder dry, folks. Let's get this step taken. There's another step on the way, and we can address these issues and questions. Still, there's an honest debate, folks, within our network, and we're in the process right now of surveying our member groups in the Win Without War Coalition. There are 40 organizations. There's an honest and open debate. Some people are saying, as you just said, John, that listen, we've got to push this political process forward. It's not what we would like to see ultimately, but it puts pressure on the president and moves the ball down the court. Much better than the alternative of just having things go on as they have gone on. On the other hand, some people are saying, but look, by supporting this, we could be supporting a war going on right through until the fall of 2008. We have all these loopholes. We're backing off Iran. That's unconscionable. We should stand on principle and oppose this, urge our members to vote no. So a healthy debate that's going on within our coalition, and a healthy debate for all of us to have. And the rubber is going to meet the road next week in the House of Representatives. There'll be a vote on Thursday on this bill. It goes to the Rules Committee, I understand, on Wednesday. So the terms of the debate will be set on Wednesday, the full debate and vote on Thursday. So we're going to have a lot to talk about amongst ourselves to sort this out, and then with our members of Congress. This is a critical moment. What do you recommend for people to be saying to their members when they're home this weekend, and if they're having any communication with them?
Well, my message would be clear, that the measure passed in the House Appropriations Committee is important to continue to increase the pressure on the president to get us out of Iraq, and it's important that supplemental appropriations bill passes the House of Representatives. If it goes down to defeat, what we'll get instead is paying for the war and no restrictions whatsoever. This is an important measure that has to pass the House of Representatives with liberals and conservatives supporting it. Otherwise, it's really going to be a defeat for us, and it'll be interpreted Democrats can't get their act together, and the war is just going to go on even longer.
Darcy?
Well, I would probably disagree with John about the fact that we would automatically necessarily get a piece of legislation that would pass, that would just be what the president requested. I don't necessarily agree that that would be what the legislative outcome would be. I also want to remind people that Saturday and Monday, Monday is the anniversary of the fourth anniversary of the war. People are going to be out doing candlelight vigils. There's going to be a lot of activity in D.C. on Saturday. People will be torn about this position, and many people will think it's a sellout. And it's very painful to have the biggest supplemental ever as our process for getting out of the war. There's some people in America who just don't read that nuance. So I think it will continue to be debated. And what could throw all kinds of new stuff in the mix is if the president goes ahead and vetoes at the end, and where we'll come back to there. But fundamentally, after this supplemental, the rest of the funding for the war will come through the traditional defense authorization, defense appropriations process. So there will be far different level of control of the levers than there ever has been before, and that's probably where the party sees that it's going to put the most level of control on these things in the future.
So my bottom line is, if the president threatens to veto this bill, if the vice president says this bill is selling out America, if the Senate Leader McConnell says this is an awful measure, then we should be for it.
We have many bites of the apple, and we have many important days ahead. As Darcy says, there's some very important events coming up this weekend here in Washington and across the country. Hopefully in your community, vigils happening on Monday night on the anniversary, the fourth anniversary of this despicable war. You can get more information about those events and where they're happening and how you can become involved right here on this website.
And the website address, please?
It's well, they probably know it because they're watching us. But in any case, www.standupcongress.org, standupcongress.org, or you can go to www.winwithoutwarus.org and get information there too. Or you can go to True Majority's website or Council for the World's website, or any of the other websites of the members of our coalition, which are all on our coalition website. Big week. Thanks for tuning in. Let's let the members of Congress know exactly where we stand, which is, bottom line, get these kids out of harm's way as quickly as we can and safely as we can. Thanks very much.